Happy Juneteenth, everyone. In honor of Juneteenth, this video will be a influential Black people throughout church history compilation. So I hope you enjoy, learn about some people you may not have heard about before, and yeah, enjoy. I would like to introduce you to Jaron Ali. She was born on February 11th in 1783 in Cape May, New Jersey. Although she was born into freedom, she grew up separated from her family because she worked as a maid 60 miles from her hometown. In 1817, Jaron was attending a service at Mother Bethel African Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. She took the pulpit and addressed the congregation. Previously, the church founder, Richard Allen, had not felt comfortable letting women speak, but changed his mind that day when he saw the gift God had given her in action. Jaron was the first African-American woman to preach the gospel publicly to racially and denominationally diverse groups of people across mid-Atlantic states, Canada, and New England. Lee struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts throughout her life, but that does not diminish how God was able to use her. Lee evangelized for almost 20 years until her passing in 1864, shortly after she published her autobiography, which defended her calling to preach. This is Absalom Jones. He was born into slavery in 1746 and taught himself how to read using the New Testament. At 16, he was separated from his family when his mother, sister, and 5 brothers were sold. By 1784, he saved enough to buy his freedom from slavery and served as an unordained pastor at St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church with his friend Richard Allen. Jones and Allen's active evangelism greatly increased the Black community at the church. Alarmed by this, in 1786, ushers attempted to remove all Black congregants from the main floor to the balcony. The Black members left, and in 1792, Jones and Allen established First African Church in Philadelphia. Jones became a deacon, and in 1802, at the age of 56, he became the first Black American priest. His legacy lived on after his passing in 1818 through the school he started and the Free African Society founded by both Jones and Allen. This is Richard Allen. He was born on February 14, 1760, presumably in Pennsylvania, while other sources say Delaware. Richard converted to Methodism at the age of 17, and in 1783, at the age of 23, bought his freedom for $2,000. The paper detailing Allen's freedom would become the first manumission document to be held as public file. Richard took the last name Allen after obtaining his freedom and joined St. George Methodist Episcopal Church. Later, Allen left the church in a mass walkout, and alongside Absalom Jones founded the Free African Society, a non-denominational religious mutual aid society dedicated to helping the Black community. In 1799, Allen became the first African American to be ordained in the Methodist Episcopal Church. In 1794, Allen, alongside other Black Methodists, founded the Bethel Church, a Black Episcopal gathering in an old blacksmith shop. Bethel Church became known as Mother Bethel and eventually led to the birth of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Julia J Foote was born in 1823. At the age of 15, she heard a sermon about the 144,000 who would sing a new song. She started to study the word with every spare moment she had. The more she studied, the more dissatisfied she became with her internal condition. A couple at her church taught her about sanctification. Later, she moved to Boston and became a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. Julia started visiting the poor and the shut-in to read the word, pray, and talk with them about the Lord. The pastor of the church she was attending falsely accused her of wrongdoing and in 1844 got her expelled from the congregation. Regardless, she became an influential preacher, traveling through the US and Canada for over 50 years, preaching at camps, revivals, and churches. She was the first woman ordained as a deacon in the AME Zion Church in 1894 and the second to be ordained as an elder in 1899. She continued to work in ministry until her death in 1901. She was an advocate for equality and ordination of women in the church. This is Maria W. Stewart. She was born free in Hartford, Connecticut in 1803, orphaned at the age of 5 and bound out as an indentured servant until she was 15. Later, she moved and became a member of a small Black community in Boston's Beacon Hill area and attended Boston's African Baptist Church. Stewart's growing faith, accompanied by the racism and segregation she experienced, led her to speak her mind publicly. In 1831, she published an essay called Religion and the Pure Principles of Morality, the Sure Foundation on Which We Must Build. Stewart condemned slavery and white racism, stating that it is not God's will for Black people to be enslaved or oppressed, and encouraging education to demand political rights, especially among Black women. In 1832, she became one of the first women to speak publicly, as it was seen as not proper or even immoral at the time. In 1834, Stewart moved from Boston to New York, where she joined the Black Female Literary Society and began to teach. David Walker was born around 1797 in North Carolina to a free mother and an enslaved father, legally making him a free man. Because of this, he grew up exposed to both the inhumane punishment runaway enslaved people received if captured and the strong culture of the slave resistance. In Charleston, Walker attended an African Methodist Episcopal church that had a strong community of activists. Walker traveled to Philadelphia, home to many fugitive, enslaved, and free Black people. It was also the base of the AME Church and its leader, Richard Allen, whom he greatly admired. By 1825, Walker had settled in Boston and was active in a small Black community on Beacon Hill. Walker was very involved in various Black civic institutions, including Prince Hall Freemasonry, the Massachusetts General Colored Association, and a Methodist church pastored by Reverend Samuel Snowden. Walker also wrote for the country's first African-American owned and operated newspaper, Freedom's Journal. George Lyle was born into slavery in 1750 in Virginia. In 1775, he became the first ordained African-American Baptist preacher. He planted the first African-American Baptist church in North America. Lyle obtained his freedom in 1778, but when the person who enslaved him died, his son tried to re-enslave him. Lyle took out a loan and became an indentured servant to pay for passage for himself, his wife, and 4 children to Jamaica. They landed on the island in 1783. He repaid his debt and started preaching to the enslaved population. By 1814, Lyle's efforts had produced nearly 8,000 Baptists in Jamaica. White colonizers accused Lyle of agitating the slaves and was imprisoned multiple times, once for more than 3 years. William Carey was said to be the first Baptist missionary, traveling to India in 1793. When that title actually belongs to Lyle, who had been doing missions work in Jamaica for nearly a decade before that. Clara Brown was born into slavery in 1800 in Virginia. She was moved to Kentucky, and while she was there, she got married and had 4 children. At the age of 35, she was sold and separated from her family. In 1859, she obtained her freedom and moved to Denver, paying her way by cooking for a group traveling that direction. Brown was reportedly the first Black woman to cross the plains during the gold rush. She established First Laundry and by 1866 accumulated $10,000 and began searching for her family, and helped relocate newly freed enslaved people to Colorado along the way, earning the title Aunt for her charitable aid and emotional support for those in need. Brown opened up her home to be used as the first church in Central City and became a key religious leader in the community. The prayer services Brown held at her home eventually led to the formation of a non-denominational church. And at the age of 79, she was still actively involved in her community. She helped run the Sunday school and continued to aid others in getting their lives together after slavery. Betsy Stockton was born in 1798. She was allowed to attend night classes at Princeton, and when revival broke out on campus, she was baptized at Princeton's First Presbyterian Church. She obtained her freedom, but due to laws in place, she remained at the Greens household as a paid domestic servant. She began to feel God's conviction and calling to share the gospel with those who had not heard it. Stockton opened up a school that taught history, English, Latin, and algebra. She trained Native Hawaiian teachers to continue her work, and by 1826, 8,000 Hawaiians had received education through the school she started. She believed that to truly understand the Bible, skills like reading and writing were so important. She helped establish the first African Presbyterian Church in Princeton in 1849, now known as Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church. Stockton used the church as a meeting place for night school and persuaded seminary students to teach African American history, English, literature, and math. Anna Julia Cooper was born in August of 1859. In 1868, she enrolled in St. Augustine's Normal School and Collegiate Institute, now St. Augustine's University. In 1884, Cooper graduated from Oberlin College in Ohio with a bachelor's degree in mathematics, receiving her master's degree in 1888. She became a faculty member at M Street High School in D.C., teaching math, science, and later on Latin. In Cooper's book, A Voice from the South, she emphasizes the importance of her faith, its impact on what she stood for, taking rest to hear from the Lord, and how the progress of women of color is a reflection of the progress of the nation, because women of color exist in an intersection of oppression. Cooper got involved in the Black Women's Club movement and began public speaking at events like the National Conference of Colored Women and the First Pan-African Conference. She became the principal of M Street High School, enhancing the curriculum, and during her tenure, several students were accepted to Ivy League universities. St. Josephine Bokito was born around 1869 in the region of Sudan. Josephine was kidnapped by enslavers and forced to walk 600 miles barefoot. Although she had always known about God, she didn't know who he was. While still enslaved, she began to ask questions and started following Christ. She found out that slavery had been outlawed in Sudan before she was born, meaning she could not legally be enslaved. She obtained her freedom and was baptized on January 9th of 1890. She became a novice with the Canossian Daughters of Charity religious order. After taking her final vows, she was assigned to a convent, and for the next 42 years, she worked as a cook and a doorkeeper there. She also traveled to other convents to tell her story. Josephine died on February 8th, 1947. In 1978, she was declared a saint, but the news was censored in Sudan, so 9 months later, the Pope traveled there and honored her publicly, making her the first Black woman to receive this title in the modern era. Daniel Blue was born into slavery in 1796. After obtaining his freedom, Blue traveled to California, arriving in Sacramento on September 2nd, 1849. And bought a home next door to California's first governor, who was known to be pro-slavery and wanted to put laws in place to prevent Black people from living in California. Blue, Barney, and George Fletcher founded St. Andrew's AME Church in 1850 in the Blues' home, starting the first Black church in California. Blue was a rich man, making his money through the gold mines and a laundry that he opened. In 1864, Blue found out about a 12-year-old girl named Edith, who had been illegally sold to a Sacramento farmer. Despite being established as a free state in 1850, this was a common occurrence to see enslaved people brought to California. Blue took the farmer to court and filed for guardianship under the pretense that the farmer was abusing Edith and holding her against her will. The judge agreed and released Edith into Blue's care, making this the last known case of slavery in California. Bessie Mason was born into slavery on August 15, 1818 in Mississippi. When her enslaver decided to move to California, she walked 1,700 miles behind a 300-wagon caravan. During her journey, she met a Black couple that told her she could legally contest her slave status once she reached California. After 5 years enslaved in California, a judge approved her petition, freeing Mason and 13 of her extended family. She moved to LA, where she worked as a midwife and a nurse, saving her money. She used her wealth to donate to various charities, feed and shelter the poor, and visit prisons. In 1872, Mason and her son-in-law founded and financed the building at 8th and Town, the first location of LA's first Black church. Mason died in 1891 and was buried in an unmarked grave. Nearly a century later, a tombstone was unveiled for her. Thursday, November 16, 1989 was declared Bessie Mason Day, and a memorial of her achievements was put up between Spring Street and Broadway at 3rd Street in Los Angeles. Ellsworth S. Thomas was born in March of 1866 in New York to free parents. He grew up in a free Black community in Binghamton, New York, that had developed strong families and created their own economic and social niche in the region. According to an 1880 census, Thomas was partially blind, and as he got older, he worked as a laundryman and laborer. Beginning in 1899, his occupation was listed as a travel evangelist. His name first appeared in the Assemblies of God Ministries directory in 1915 as a colored pastor. Initially ordained by a Pentecostal pastor in 1913, Thomas's AG ordination application was accepted in 1917, making him the first Black AG pastor. He pastored a church in Beaver Meadows, New York for almost 5 years, after continued to hold evangelistic meetings in his home while also speaking at other churches. Thomas became known throughout the Eastern District for his Bible teaching and good cheer. Reverend Clay Evans was born on June 23, 1925 in Brownsville, Tennessee. Evans was ordained in 1950 and founded the Fellowship Baptist Church, also known as the SHIP. He also sang with various church choirs and wrote gospel songs. In 1965, Evans and Reverend Jesse Jackson founded Operation PUSH, one of the country's leading civil rights organizations. Between 1971 and 1976, Evans was a chairman and set the direction of the group. In 1982, Evans published his autobiography, From Plowhandle to Pulpit, where he talked about his journey from the fields of his childhood home to the forefront of the civil rights movement. Evans released his first musical project in 1984 called What He's Done for Me, later releasing 10 more albums. In 1988, he was appointed to the International Committee of Reference, which worked to create a global ministry. He served as Rainbow, or PUSH's national board chairman from 2008 to 2012, passing away in 2019. Lemwell Hayes was born in West Hartford, Connecticut on July 18, 1753. Abandoned by his parents, Hayes worked as an indentured servant, where he worked in a farm during the day and attended plantation school at night. A Saturday evening household custom was to read sermons from the local church. One Saturday, Hayes was reading a powerful sermon that he had written, and from then on would help write, proofread, and deliver sermons. Once free, he built a home in Granville, Massachusetts, and enlisted in a local farmers' militia called the Minutemen. After the war, he returned home and continued to train in theology, studying Latin and Greek. He received his license to preach and accepted the call at Congregational Church of Middle Granville, becoming the first Black minister of an all-white congregation. In 1785, he became the first Black ordained minister. Hayes' sermons and essays on liberty, natural rights, and justice were distributed internationally, making him the first Black man to be published. Benjamin Mays was born on August 1, 1894, to enslaved parents who obtained their freedom after the Civil War. Mays had a great desire to get an education, which conflicted with his father's desire for him to work on the family farm. He graduated high school from Orangeburg State and entered college at Virginia Union. He entered divinity school in 1921. He worked as a professor at Morehouse College, the National Urban League, and the YMCA. Mays received his master's degree in 1925 and his doctorate in 1935. During those years, he was ordained into the Baptist ministry. From 1934 to 1940, Mays served as the dean of the Howard University School of Religion and then moved on to be the president of Morehouse College. He served as Martin Luther King Jr.'s unofficial senior advisor, gave the benediction at the close of the March on Washington, and the eulogy at King's funeral. Mays published a few books from 1933 to 1971, including his autobiography, called Born to Rebel. Mitzi Smith was born on the west side of Columbus, Ohio. She has been in ministry since 1982 and was ordained itinerant elder in the African Episcopal Church. She became the first Black woman to earn her doctorate in New Testament at Harvard in 2006. Since her graduation, she has written on the New Testament and early Christianity at Ashland Theological Seminary and Columbia Theological Seminary, including titles like Insights from an African American Interpretation and Toward Decentering the New Testament, a Reintroduction. She has also helped write commentaries on Philemon, Ephesians, 1 Corinthians, etc. Smith encourages people to pay attention to details in the Bible that we might miss because of our own perspective and experiences. She is currently the professor of New Testament at Columbia Theological Seminary. Denmark Vesey was born in 1757. In 1815, white Charleston residents discovered that Black Methodists had been pooling their money to buy freedom for enslaved congregates. So they moved to restrict Black autonomy. Over 4,000 Black members left white churches in protest and formed an African Methodist Episcopal Church. Vesey joined that church in 1817. He became a class leader, hosting a small group in his home. White authorities disrupted an AME service attended by free Black ministers and arrested 140 people. Vesey considered leaving for Africa but decided to stay, preaching that freedom for enslaved people would be realized, and began organizing an uprising. White authorities were warned about the planned uprising and prepared a military response, preventing the revolt from even starting. 130 Black people were arrested, 67 were convicted, and of these, 35, including Vesey, were hanged. Vesey became a martyr for African Americans and a symbol for the abolitionist movement. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you had a wonderful Juneteenth, celebrating the end of slavery, actually, for everyone. And yeah, go out there, support your Black brothers and sisters, family members, friends, etc., and have a blessed day. Bye.